dina de garmi, even if you're going to follow the opinion that we are not da'in dina de garmi, that means we do not obligate a person who causes damage by way of a secondary action. Upater milashalim is going to be pater. Aser ligrom, nevertheless, it is prohibited to cause it. Now, the problem with this Rashi is as follows. When it comes to secondary or causative damages, there are two terms that are used throughout halacha, throughout the Rishonim, throughout the Achronim, throughout the Gemara. One of them is called a grama. Grama, for the most part, is the term which is associated with a causative action where you cause damage, but it's not direct. It's indirect. And every time it says grama b'nizakin, we always say grama b'nizakin pater. That means when you take me to Beis Din and you say, listen, Rabbi Richter, you caused me damage, and I say, I'm sorry, I didn't do it, I may have done something which caused it, and it's a grama, in such a case I will not be obligated to pay. Garmi is a terminology which is used when I cause damage to somebody, but I am obligated to pay. That's generally how the terminology is used. Now the problem over here is Rashi seems to mix them up. Our Gemara is talking about a grama, and then Rashi throws in lo da'in dina de garmi. Now we mentioned in the shir a number of months ago that Rashi clearly is of the opinion that there's no difference between a grama and a garmi. As a matter of fact, Rashi is of the opinion that garmi just describes the opinion which says that grama is chayiv, and grama is the term to use to describe the opinion that grama is pater. In other words, groundbreaking information. Throughout Shas it says grama b'nizakin pater. If you cause damage, you're pater. Says Rashi, that's not unanimous. Not everybody agrees with that. There's different opinions in the Gemara. Rav Ashi is the one above Akama, but ultimately Rashi's opinion is there's no difference. You can't spend any time trying to figure out what's a grama, what's a garmi. It's just two different opinions. Opinion one, you cause damage, you're chayiv. Opinion two, you cause damage, you're pater. Tosfos over here, you can see Tosfos over here has a long discussion about this. And Tosfos brings three different opinions in the Rishonim as to what the difference between a grama is and a garmi. Most of those opinions basically describe where a garmi is much closer to actually doing it than causing it. In other words, there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of causing damage. Grama is all the way to one end of the spectrum, which is, I clearly didn't do it. I did set up a situation where the damage could happen, but I didn't do it. Garmi is when I came so close to doing it, but I didn't actually do something. For example, if I tear up a person's shtar, a person's contract, so now he can't collect a loan. So now, I didn't steal money from him, but I came so close to stealing his ability to be able to collect the money because I directly touched the item, I ripped it up. Now he can't use it. It's soresh doroso shachavero, koresh doroso shachavero. In such a case, that's where a lot of the Rishonim are going to say that falls into the category of a garmi. At the end of Tosfos, I encourage you to look at this. There's 3 lines from the bottom. Tosfos says, "V'nira liritzba," and he quotes the opinion from the Ritzba, which is the dina de garmi havi mitam knas. Again, following the same line of reasoning as Rashi, which is there's no difference between a grama and a garmi. All cases, whether it's grama or garmi, all those cases are not my action. It's just me doing something which eventually causes damage. And he goes on, Kedemuchach b'Yerushalmi, v'lachein kol hezek hamatzui v'ragel. Anytime there was causative damage that became prevalent, it became common. V'ragel lavo kansu chachamim. The Chachamim imposed a knas. So says the Ritzba something very interesting, which is there are some cases of grama which are very rare. They don't happen very often. And therefore Chazal said, listen, let's look what happened. Did you cause damage? Yes. Is that nice? No. Is it mutter to do that? No. Are you obligated to pay for the damage that you caused? The answer is no, because you didn't do it. However, when it becomes something which is very prevalent, it's very common, and it's becoming a nuisance to society, and it might actually become some kind of scheme people start engaging in to actually steal money. So now, again, is it mutter? Of course not. But in some cases, Chazal said we have to actually put into place a prevention system which is going to stop people from doing this. So they actually said you're going to be financially obligated to pay for this. We went through a number of cases in this year. We can't go through that right now. But just halacha l'maisa, the Ramah paskins like this ritzbah. And the Ramah actually takes it a step further. The Ramah says any case which any particular based in anywhere in the world decides that this is something which is common, the Beis Din has the ability to be able to say, we're going to charge you for the grama. So now, practically speaking, two neighbors get into an argument, or there's some kind of financial dispute, some kind of investment, maybe somebody took someone else's money and was lazy with it, which is clearly a grama. If a Beis Din nowadays decides that this is coming out to be a common problem, even if that case was not listed in the Gemara, says the Ramah, the Beis Din has the ability to impose that knas, and Rav Asher Weiss writes that very clearly in his tshuva in Minchas Asher. The Shach, on the other hand, argues with the Ramah, and the Shach says the only times that a Beis Din can actually impose this financial penalty is one of the cases that Chazal in the Gemara actually said they're going to give a knas for. In other words, you can't just allow every Beis Din to decide what's common and what's uncommon. There are certain cases that Chazal determined were common. In those cases, they said you're chayiv. In certain cases, they said it's not common, and therefore you're going to be pater. So a big difference between the Ramah and the Shach is how much autonomy is given to each particular Beis Din to decide whether or not it's a grama or a garmi, and whether or not they're going to charge for it. And if it's going to be considered common, it's going to be prevalent, a modern Beis Din, according to the Ramah, has the ability to charge someone for a grama. Okay, that's just against the background and what happens here with the topic of Garma B'nai Zaken, but a lot of that comes really from this Tosfos over here. If you look in Shulchan Aruch, in Choshen Mishpash, Siman Shin Pei Vav, I think it's Sif Beis, that's where the Ramah quotes this Ritzbah, and it clearly comes from Parak Lo Yachbar, Daf Chaf Beis Amud Beis. Okay, let's move on. Rabbi Yosef, Havalu Hanu Taloi. Rabbi Yosef had these palm trees, Tahavu, top of Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph, Tahavu Asu Umni. So these blood letters would come, v'yasfu tutayu. After they would let blood, they would relax a little bit, and they would sit under the trees. Now, it doesn't seem like it was very good hygiene, or it wasn't very clean over there. They didn't take proper precautions to make sure things were clean. And they would sit there, and blood would be dripping out of their hands. Now, va'asu arvi, and these ravens would come, and achli dama. They would eat the blood. V'salki abeitala yumafzidi. They would fly up afterwards to these trees. They had dates on them, and they would ruin the dates. It seemed like they just got blood all over these dates, and that wasn't very appetizing. So umafzidi tamri. They would ruin these dates. Amal Rav Yosef. Yosef showed up one day. He sees all these blood letters sitting there under the tree, and he said to them, "Afiku li korkor mehacha." Get your birds out of here. Tosfos explains, Rashi explains, what's korkor? It says, Arvim shedomim b'tzakasam kekorin korkor. In other words, he called them korkors because that's what they sounded like. That's what the sound that these ravens would make. So he said, get these birds out of here. You're ruining my trees. You're ruining my fruits. Amar le Abaya. So Abaya said, listen to Hagramahu. They're not doing anything. They're just allowing blood to drip out of their hands all over the floor. And there was like a cause which the birds came by. In other words, it's a secondary action. Amarle hachi amar of tuvi bar masna zosamaris grama b'nizakin. So this teaches us that even though you might not be able to charge them for it, grama b'nizakin nevertheless is forbidden. Now they want to ask us another question. Okay, it's possible that they wouldn't be allowed to establish themselves here in the first place. The problem is they already established themselves here for a long time. They have a chazaka. In other words, we're going to learn about this in the next parak, that when a person does something for a particular amount of time, and no one goes ahead and protests against them, it establishes their right to be there. We'll discuss this a little bit later on today in the shir as well, but ultimately, generally speaking, you need to have two things. You need to have a chazaka, which is that I've been there for 3 years and nobody went ahead and protested. And the other thing is I have to have a chazaka sheyesh imotaina. I have to be able to explain what I'm doing there. I can't just say I'm here. I have to say I'm here because I bought it. I'm here because I found it. I'm here because I have permission to be here. I'm here because someone gifted it to me. But ultimately, these people have a chazaka. No one has told them to get out of here beforehand. Ha'amar, the Gemara says, Ha'amar of Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua, in chazaka l'nizakin. There are certain things you can have a chazaka for. I can have a chazaka, an establishment that I'm allowed to use your property. I'm allowed to live in this piece of property. But you cannot establish a chazaka that I'm allowed to cause you damage. That's just not one of the things that you're allowed to acquire by way of a chazaka. The Gemara says, hold on, that's not true. V'lav itmar Allah. Haven't we learned about that statement of Mari Amar B'kutra and Rav Zvid Amar B'beis HaKisei? When is it that we say that a person cannot establish their right to cause damage? That's only with extreme damages, such as lighting an oven which continuously billows out smoke into other people's property, which is it's excessive damage. It's very bothersome. The other example is when a person establishes a bathroom, an outhouse. In such a case, it's putrid. It's disgusting. It's impossible to deal with the smell. So Hani lididi da'anina datai ki kutra ubeisa kisi damali. So he explained to them, I myself, having these blood all over my dates is similar to having smoke or having the smell of a bathroom. In other words, I can't take it. I really can't take it. I can't stand having this blood all over my fruits. It's terribly damaging. Now, interestingly, we talk about a bathroom, so both Rashi and Tosfos explained the bathroom over here was talking about an above-ground bathroom. So it was the worst possible case. Tosfos explains, however, our bathrooms, we already have a modernized bathroom, says Tosfos. It's already underground, it's covered, it's not a problem, it's fine. Now I will tell you, I spent some time in, I think this was actually in Azerbaijan, Baku, when I was young. I went and I used to go do camps there in the summer. And I will tell you, even the ones that are under the ground, stay far away. It is absolutely disgusting. So I don't know what Tosfos was talking about, but we're blessed to have a little lever. You push it down and then gone. But ultimately, yes, these things are really putrid, very bothersome. And he says, I can't deal with having the blood all over it. There's more to talk about on the sugya, but we have to move on. Marchikin, Mishnah, Marchikin es hashovech min ha'ir chamishim ama. So a person wants to go ahead and build one of these dovecotes. So we started talking about these dovecotes. So a guy wants to build one. The halacha is, if you want to build it, you have to distance it from the city 50 amos. Why is it? Because you're going to be raising a bunch of birds, and the birds are going to get hungry, and people inside the city are going to go ahead and plant, and your birds are going to go out, eat up all the seeds. So therefore, you have to move it 50 amos away. The lo yasa adam shovech basoch shalo. The Mishnah says you also have to make sure not to build a dovecote within your own property. You have to make sure that it's going to have 50 amos to all the different sides. So there's two different issues. One of them is eating the seeds. The other one is eating the grains that are drying out. And that's illustrated by both of these cases. Rabbi Yehuda says, Beis arba kurin. 50 amos is not enough. You have to make sure that you move your shavach, your dovecote, 4 kurin away, malei shagar hayona, which is the amount of distance that these doves can fly, which is approximately 275 amos. It's much more space. If you bought a dovecote which was already there, afilu beis rova, even if all you left was a beis rova, a small amount of space, Aryeh hu b'chezkaso, you're allowed to keep it there. We're going to discuss later on in the Gemara what this means, but basic idea is, once you buy it from someone else, you assume that person who built that dovecote had permission to build it there. He got a variance somehow, and he had permission to build it, even though there weren't 50 amos on each side. The Gemara now challenges this and says, "Chamishim am v'sulo." Are you telling me all you have to have is 50 amos for your birds? The problem is, V'raminu, we have a stira, ein parsa nishbin liyonim. A person's not allowed to set out bird traps, elam kein hayarachok min hayishav shloshim ris, unless you distance it from the city 30 ris. Now 30 ris is 4 mil. Each mil is 2,000 amos, so it's 8,000 amos. In other words, you have to make sure not to put down a trap to catch birds unless it's 8,000 amos away from the settlement. Why is that? Because you might want to catch birds. However, you can't catch your neighbor's birds. So therefore, you have to make sure to move your traps so far away that you won't catch any birds. Clearly, what does this describe? That birds can fly 8,000 amos. So why are you telling me that 50 amos is enough? Amar Rabbi, you're right. Meishit shaiti tuva. Birds can fly very far. However, v'krasayu b'chamishim amsa malya. How far do they have to go to eat? In other words, a bird might fly thousands upon thousands of amos, but the bird eats only within the first 50 amos. Then it's full, and then it goes merrily out there flying and having a good time, but it's not going to be eating. So therefore, the halachas for a trap and the halachas of making sure your birds don't eat someone else's food are going to be different. For a trap, it's got to be 8,000 amos. For making sure your birds don't eat someone else's seeds, that's only 50 amos. Now, Meshit Shloshim Ris V'Sulo, are you telling me that they only fly these 30 ris? V'Atanya, we learned in a brisa, Ubi Yisha Filameya Mil. If you're inside a city, you have to make sure to keep your traps even 100 mil away. So hold on a second. If birds can fly 100 mil, so we're talking about thousands upon thousands of amos over here. So why are you limiting it at 4 mil? V'yishuv, in a settlement, afila mea mil lo yifros. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef Amar b'yishuv kramim. We're talking about yishuv kramim. In other words, birds can't fly 100 mil. But what they can do is, they can fly 4 mil, settle down in someone's vineyard, take a rest. It's kind of like a rest stop. They stop there, they eat lunch, they do what they have to do, they relax, they walk their dog, and then they get back up into the air, and they fly again, another 2,000 amos, and then there's another kerem, and they stop there for a little bit, and they relax for a little bit, so they're ultimately able to travel all these thousands of amos. However, it's only going to work if there are breaks in between. So you're right, they cannot fly more than these 4 mil, but if they're going on a long journey, they can continuously stop along the way and ultimately get very far, and that's why you have to be very careful about setting out traps. Rav Amar B'Yishuv Shovchim, what it's talking about is that there are different dovecotes. So they go from one dovecote to the next. So they'll fly to one dovecote, and they'll actually settle there, they'll relax there, they'll go to bed for the night, they wake up in the morning and fly further. So when you're putting out your traps, you have to make sure not to do it next to these other dovecotes. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. You're telling me that there are other dovecotes along the way? So this thing doesn't make any sense. You're telling me you have to make sure that when you're going to set out your traps, you're going to make sure that it's 100 amos from the dovecote. That means the dovecote's here. You want to put your trap here, you have to make sure that it's 100 amos because birds from this dovecote can get into your trap. Now how do they get there? Because there are dovecotes along the way. So hold on, forget about that one. There's a dovecote right here. So why are you measuring your amos from that one? There's a dovecote right near your trap. So you have to extend it even further. So this doesn't make any sense, says the Gemara. Gemara says, one suggestion is Didei. He actually owns it. The guy who's putting out the traps owns it. So therefore he's allowed to trap his own birds. Another way of explaining this is that these dovecotes do not belong to Jews. And what this means is, the Ritva explains this, which is, of course, Gezel Akum is still also not a steal from a non-Jew. What does that mean? The answer is that the legal system over there did not prohibit people from putting out traps. In other words, it was considered to be legal. People understood that. This law that we have is specifically a Jewish law, that we stop someone from putting out a trap which might potentially catch someone else's bird. That's a halacha, that's only a Jewish law. So therefore, for people who are not Jewish, they're not subject to those laws. It could be that those shovchin were built many years ago, and ultimately they were made hefker, and the owner he has just given up ownership of them. Therefore, they belong to the public, and therefore catching those birds is not a problem. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Beis Arba Kurin. So now, this header is not really so appropriate for the next Gemara, because the next Gemara really is focusing on the second half of the line, which is that if you bought a dovecote, then even if it doesn't have that much space, you're allowed to keep it there. So the Gemara says, Amar Papa v'temer is vid. Papa, some say it was vid, say the following. Zos Someris, this teaches us toanin lokeach v'toanin liyoresh. So as follows. We mentioned earlier that the halacha of chazaka works like this. If I settle down in a piece of property and I'm living there for a number of years, then someone comes over to me and says, excuse me, Mr. Richter, what are you doing in this piece of property? And I say, well, I've been living here for a number of years. No one protested. That's not a valid reason for me to live there. I can't just say that I squatted in someone's house, no one kicked me out, and therefore I get a right to stay there. However, if I say, I bought this piece of property, or I was given this piece of property, or I inherited this estate from someone else, and I've been here for a number of years, so then I have a chazaka that I've been here for a number of years, and I have a valid claim as how I got there, then those two things together give me the ability to be able to stay in the piece of property. If I either don't have a valid claim as to how I got there, or I don't have a chazaka, so therefore I have to leave. In other words, the reason for a chazaka is, nowadays we're able to store documents for a long time, you can just keep it digital, but it was understood that people might lose their contract. So if you say to a person he has to hold on to his contract for his home for the rest of his life, he might not be able to hold on to it. So therefore, if a person comes with a valid claim as to how he got the property, and he says, I've been here for a long enough time and no one protested, that works. Now in this case, very nice that you bought this piece of property from somebody, but what's your claim? Why do you have permission to have this there? The Gemara understands that we as a Beis Din will fabricate a claim for this person. He has no idea why the seller set up this dovecote there. He has no idea what the rationale is. Nevertheless, we as a Beis Din will make that claim for him. Our Mishnah teaches us that we'll fabricate this claim for a buyer or for someone who inherits. And the Gemara explains, Yoresh, Gemara Tanina, we already learned another place that when a child inherits his father's estate, he doesn't have to know all his father's, every one of the affairs that happen. We'll just make up a claim for him that will work. Where do we see that? We already know that because Abab Mishum Yerusha, if a person claims the property belongs to him because he inherited it, Eino Tzarach Taina, he doesn't have to have a claim, he just has to know that he got it from his father. Lokeach Yitzrich, the Gemara says the reason why we have to mention this is because we're teaching us the halacha of Lokeach. The Gemara says, hold on. Lokeach Nami Tanina. We also have a Mishnah that teaches us that when a person buys something, even if he doesn't know the claim, he doesn't understand where the seller got it from, nevertheless, we'll make the claim for him. Where, because laka chatzar, a person buys a chatzar, he buys one of these courtyards, ubazizin neguzuz turaos, and there's these little beams that are protruding out. Hareza b'chezkasa, he's allowed to keep it that way, even though he's not allowed to build it that way. Why? Because we say it must be that the original person who built this piece of property, who bought this piece of property, had permission to build those protrusions out into the public space, and therefore when I buy it, I'm allowed to keep it there. So again, we'll make that claim for him. So why do we have to have our Mishnah which teaches us this halacha? The Gemara says, Stricha, we need both. Why diyash min and hasam? If we're only going to teach the halacha over there, I would say Gabi Rishus Harabim, that's a public place. I would say the Amor Konus L'toch Shalo. It must be that when the original owner built it, he built it with a setback, and therefore, when they were protruding out, they were really protruding out into property that belonged to him, and that's fine. He went to the zoning board, and the zoning board gave him a variance, and it's really what Tosfos says. Tosfos says he went to the Zayin Tuvia Ear, he went to the zoning board, and they gave him permission to be able to build those out. Aval hacha, lo, in our case of our Mishnah, I would say maybe that doesn't work. V'yashmin and hacha, if our Mishnah was the only place that taught it, and we deleted the other place where we teach this halacha, I would say over here, kivan the yachid who we're dealing with an individual in our case, ema piyuse paise. Maybe he just gave him some money, and therefore he was okay with it. In other words, he said, fine, no problem, you could keep your dovecoat over there. Inami yichuli achel gabe. Maybe he just was a nice guy, and he said he could do it. Well, Rabbim, man pious, who are you going to go ahead? You're going to go ahead and appease everyone in the Shus Rabbim? That won't work. Uman shavek, who's going to give it up? Malot tzricha. Therefore, you have to have both cases. But ultimately, we learn that when a person buys something, once he bought it, we assume that the original owner had permission to build it the way that he did, and therefore we do not obligate the buyer to go ahead and explain why he's allowed to keep it that way. Hareyu b'chazkaso. So again, the Gemara says, all right, so you went ahead and you bought a piece of property, or you bought this shovech in someone else's property, and it's in violation of the distancing law. You're allowed to do that because you established a chazaka. Just at the top of today's Amud, we said, Ein chazaka l'nizakin. You can't establish the right to cause people damage. So therefore the Gemara says, Harei b'chazkasa, v'amar Rav Nachman amar Rav Baravua, Ein chazaka l'nizakin. You're not allowed to establish yourself as causing someone else damage. So you're going to put your dovecoat there and all your birds are going to go out and cause people damage. That's not okay. The Gemara says, like we said before, of Mariam Amar Bekutra, of Zvid Amar Besakise. The only time you cannot establish yourself as causing damage is when you do something which is so difficult to tolerate, like smoke or the smell, the stench of a bathroom. In such a case, you can't establish a chazaka. However, other nizakin you can establish. Going to the top of Chaf Dalid, Chaf Gimel Amar Beis, new Mishnah. Nipol hanimtza beso chamishim ama. This Mishnah does not belong in this Masechta, or certainly not in this parak, because it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. However, Rishonim explained that it's here because it follows along the same concept with birds. But again, this really talks about the halacha of finding a bird. Are you allowed to keep it, or do you have to return it? It should be in Maseches above Metzia, Parakela Metzias. Nevertheless, it's here. So Nipol, you have this little bird which fell down. Hanimtza beso chamishim ama. It's found within 50 amos of its dovecote. Hareyu shabal shovach. We assume it belongs to the owner of that dovecote. Why? Because it's close enough. Chutz michamishim ama. If it's outside the perimeter of 50 amos, hareyu shemotzah, the one who finds it is allowed to keep it. Nimtza bein shnei shovchos. What happens if he finds it between two dovecotes? If it's karov lazeh shalom. If it's closer to one of them, we assume it belongs to him. Karov lazeh shalom. If it's closer to the other one, we assume it belongs to that one. Very logical. Two dovecotes, a bird falls out, it just hatched, and if it's on the floor, it's not flying yet. Which shovach does it belong to? The answer is the one that it's closer to. Mechtzal mech. So what if it's exactly in the middle? Halacha is shneim yachloku. They will divide it. Okay. Amar Rav Chanina. A very big shas sugi over here. Rov v'karov holchin achar harov. There are different types of. There are different ways that we answer different sfekos that we have. And I'm being very careful how I say that because of the fact that this is a shas sugya, a lot of the poskim or the achronim spend time talking about when you have these different determining factors, are they actually determining factors that gives you the fact, which is called a birur, or is it hanhaga, it just tells you how to behave? So now, you know the concept of a rov. Rov means that most of the circumstances which we have before us would lead us to the following result. That's rov. We also have a concept called karov, which means this item is closest to this place. So typical example, Teisha Chanuyos. You have 10 stores which sell meat. 9 of them sell kosher meat. 1 of them sells non-kosher meat. You find a piece of meat somewhere in the street. The halach is halchanach harov. We say kol de parish, meruba parish. Since most of the meat in this neighborhood is coming from kosher stores, you could assume this piece of meat is kosher. There's another idea, which is karov, which is maybe the meat should be determined based on which store it's closest to. So if it's close to the kosher store, it's kosher. If it's close to the non-kosher store, it's non-kosher. And now the Gemara says when you have these two determining factors, either that it comes from the majority or that it's closest, and they come head to head. The majority says A. Karov says B. Which one do you follow? The Gemara says Rov, Karov, Halchan Achar Rov. We follow Rov. Again, the Rishonim explain why this would be, but it's not for now. We don't have enough time. Even though using the determining factor of Rov is a biblical logic, in other words, it comes from the Torah, Vikorva Dairaisa. And the concept of determining information based on how close it is also biblical. It comes from the Torah. Nevertheless, we're going to follow Rov. Masir Reb Zera. Zera asks the following question. When it comes to Egla Rufa, what's Egla Rufa? You find a person, an unidentified person who is murdered. And we don't know who killed this person. The halacha is we figure out which city he is closest to, and they have to go through the process of Egla Rufa. Why? We assume that the Rotzeach, the murderer, came from the closest city. Now, that obviously is the source for a karov. We're going to determine that he was killed by a person in the closest city. Even though there's another city which is farther away but has more people. So which one do we follow? We follow karov, the closest city, or the city that has more people? So it seems clear that we follow the one which is closer, because when it comes to Egla Rufa, the only thing the Torah says is you follow the city which is closest, not the city that has more people. Gemara says, nah, b'deleka. It's only talking about a case where there aren't cities that are larger. Hold on, but there's more people in the world. Gemara says, this corpse was found in an isolated area in the mountains. Okay. Tanan, Nipol Animtz B'Socha Mishamama. You find this bird within 50 amos of a dovecote. Harei Hu Shabal Shovech. We automatically determine that it is owned by that dovecote which is close by. Even though there are other dovecotes which might be larger. So again, clearly, a person has this massive field of dovecotes. He has tons of birds. Another person has one. Now, we're going to say that this bird that's found on the floor belongs to the one who's closest, even if he only has one. So now we see that karov is more of a determining factor than a rov. Gemara says, no, incorrect. Our Mishnah is talking about when there isn't another person who has more. Gemara says, if that's the case, im seifa. The seifa tells us, chutz michamishim amos. If you find this bird outside of 50 amos, hareu shel motzao, the person who finds it can keep it. Now, videleka, if there's no other dovecotes in the area, then how did it get there? Vadimir hu nafal, it must have come from this person's dovecote. Gemara says, what we're talking about now, we have to change everything. What we're talking about in our Mishnah is bimidada. It's a bird that can't fly. It hobbles along. So the Amar of Ukva bar Chama kol medada eino yoseminun. When a bird hobbles, it can't go farther than 50 amos, and therefore, if this bird is beyond 50 amos, it couldn't possibly have come from this person's dovecote. It must have fallen out of someone's wagon or something like that, but it couldn't have come from someone's dovecote, or maybe it flew. But ultimately, it can't be that it's from this person's, and therefore, we allow the finder to keep it. Buyer of Yirmiyah. Yirmiyah has the following question. This is a very famous question of Yirmiyah. Again, let's understand what's happening here. Our Gemara tells us that a bird cannot hobble more than 50 amos. So therefore, if you have a shovech, you have this dovecote, and within 50 amos of that dovecote you find a bird that's hobbling along, we assume it belongs to the owner of that dovecote. If it's beyond 50 amos, we say that it belongs to the one who finds it because it must have come from someplace else. Why is that? Because this hobbling bird can't get beyond 50 amos. So asks Rabbi Yirmiyah as follows. What happens if raglo achas besoch nun ama, v'raglo achas chutz michamishim ama? 1 foot is within 50 amos, but another foot is outside 50 amos. Is that possible? The Gemara says, Ma'o, what's the halacha? V'alda because of this question, Afkuhu, Rabbi Yirmiyah mi Midrash. They chucked him out of the base medrash. They said, Rabbi Yirmiyah, get out. Why did they kick him out? So Rashi says he was bothering them. What does that mean? Tosfos explains, there's a lot of Rishonim discuss this, that the reason why they kicked him out is because he was questioning the shiurim of Chazal. Chazal thought about the measurement of 50 amos. And Chazal said definitively, a bird that hobbles cannot make it more than 50 amos. Rabbi Yirmiyah, why are you questioning that? Why are you saying maybe 50 and a little bit, like just a little bit more? 50 amos is the shear. So they threw him out of the base medrash. Later on in the Masechta, don't worry about it, we'll get there. They allowed Rabbi Yirmiyah back into the base medrash, and we'll see it comes up. But ultimately, he was kicked out. There's so much to say on this, but there's only 2 minutes left. Tashema, let's try to bring a riot to this case. Nimtza bein shnei shovchos. Karl l'zeh shelo, Karl l'zeh shelo. You find the bird between two different dovecotes, depends which one it's closer to. V'yaf v'gav d'chayim now nafesh b'chavrei. Even though one of them has more. So you see clearly that we don't go after rove. We always go after what's closer. What are we talking about in this case? Sheshneim shavin. Both of them had the same amount of birds. So the Gemara says, why don't we just say we'll go after the majority of birds in the world, because there's more birds than just those two dovecotes. The Gemara says, what are we talking about over here? Bishvil shel kramim. It was found in this pathway in the middle of the vineyards. If you're going to tell me that it came from someplace else other than these two dovecotes, kivan demididi, since they're hobbling along, lo matzi asi, it couldn't have come there. Why? The Gemara explains just some science of birds, which is the kol demididi v'hadar chazile lekine mididi. Birds that hobble along will only hobble as long as they could turn around and see their nest where they came from. Once their nest is no longer in their sight, they're going to stop. The ilo, lo mididi. If they can't see their nest, their dovecote where they were raised, they won't go farther. So therefore the Gemara says it cannot be, it came from other places. It must be that it's from one of these two different dovecotes, and therefore the one that it's closer to is going to be the one that it belongs to. We'll stop here for today. Have a wonderful day.